The movie that nobody wanted to see, and I mean that seriously, nobody wants to see this movie. Ticket pre-sales are nowhere near what Disney was hoping for. Let's just say if you wanted to buy tickets for the 9 p.m. show tonight, wherever you are in America, you'd be just fine.
From the moment Disney revealed it was resurrecting one of its most treasured classics, people everywhere braced themselves. After all, few titles carry as much nostalgia as the original Snow White, the 1937 animated masterpiece that practically saved Disney's entire operation back in the day. But something unexpected happened. The second details trickled out about the new live-action adaptation. The excitement that usually greets a big Disney event turned sour, fast. Rumors, leaks, and unusual creative decisions hinted that this Snow White would be a radical break from the version the world once adored. Fans began asking a single loaded question. How much can you change a beloved story before it stops being that story at all? Things only escalated once Rachel Z came into the picture. She was set to play the iconic princess, a role that could have propelled her to instant Disney royalty. But behind the scenes, her own public statements, rumored conflicts, and an avalanche of social media chatter suggested that everything about this production was off-kilter. Fans who grew up with the original Snow White, or who simply valued Disney's consistent legacy, started worrying that the updated spin might not just tweak a few details, but upend them in ways that showed little understanding of the classic's core magic. By the time filming wrapped, the project had become a swirling cloud of suspicion and frustration, and that was before anyone had even seen the final movie. As release day neared, many of these fears were confirmed. Ticket sales began rolling in at shockingly low levels for a film bearing the Disney name. Critics, both mainstream and independent, tore into the production with a vigor that felt more personal than the usual round of film reviews. Some called it sloppy, confused, or half-hearted. Others said it disrespected Walt Disney's original vision on a fundamental level. Suddenly, a project that might have been a triumphant update turned into a possible black mark on Disney's recent track record. But that was only the start of the turmoil. The fiasco called attention to a broader problem. Can you rework a legendary fairy tale, one that changed animation forever, without alienating the very people who made it iconic? In an era when reboots are more common than ever, this question hovers over every new release. Disney, which has found massive success adapting cartoons into live-action blockbusters, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, The Lion King, suddenly faced a potential meltdown. Unlike those earlier hits, this Snow White threatened to be a rare misstep, or even a total disaster. Early glimpses pointed to sweeping changes. People whispered that the dwarfs we all knew, those familiar personalities that have charmed audiences for decades, wouldn't be quite the dwarfs anymore. Instead, some fresh interpretation involving mythical, magical beings, or even background changes to their lore was rumored. That alone set longtime fans on edge. But once Rachel Z made certain remarks about how outdated the original story was, everything blew wide open. Fans grew furious that the actress chosen to star in this reimagining seemed unimpressed with or downright dismissive of the beloved film that started the entire Disney phenomenon. Some demanded that the studio step in and rein her comments back. Others insisted she was simply stating modern sensibilities. Either way, a storm of backlash rolled in almost overnight. By the time official teasers for the film appeared online, the downvotes stacked higher than anyone could have expected. The Snow White trailer turned into comedic fodder, with memes mocking not just the changes in story and character design, but also Rachel Z's public persona. What was once just a niche controversy among die-hard Disney fans ballooned into a mainstream phenomenon. YouTubers, commentators, and casual observers jumped onto the topic, dissecting every new detail. They pointed to the film's approach, too serious in some spots, too comedic or forced in others, and hopelessly trying to straddle a line between faithful homage and 21st century modernization. The result, they claimed, was a muddled production with an identity crisis. Like what you see, hit like. Love where this is going? Smash that subscribe, we're just getting started. Things got more complicated when the box office numbers started coming in. On opening weekend, theaters looked sparse. Online, people shared photos of near-empty auditoriums. It seemed the film hadn't found an audience beyond the most dedicated Disney completists or the merely curious. Critics on Rotten Tomatoes voiced their disappointment, awarding it a tepid rating that fell far short of typical Disney grandeur. Meanwhile, word of mouth on social media sounded downright brutal. Friends told friends not to bother spending money on tickets, and others joked that even watching it on a plane wouldn't be worth the time. That kind of negative buzz has sunk more than a few cinematic efforts over the years, and it seemed unstoppable. Disney's executives likely panicked behind the scenes. In particular, Bob Iger, famously having returned to the helm of the company after an earlier retirement, must have been surveying the damage with a concerned eye. After all, the fate of modern Snow White could ripple out into theme parks, merchandising deals, and streaming synergy. A massive disappointment like this doesn't just hurt one film's bottom line, it sows doubt about the entire brand strategy. If audiences were rolling their eyes at this project, what would that imply for upcoming live-action takes on other classic favorites? Where the drama intensified, though, was around Rachel Z herself. She was still fairly new to the Hollywood spotlight, having starred in high-profile roles, but never facing a meltdown quite like this. Initially, Disney likely expected her to bring youthful energy and strong singing talent to a timeless princess. Instead, her name became a lightning rod for controversy. Many pointed to her interviews where she seemed to challenge or scold the fan base for clinging to old-fashioned visions of Snow White. On social media, she sometimes gave off an air of entitlement or condescension, at least in the eyes of her critics. And as the scrutiny increased, everything she said or posted began fueling fresh outrages. One example that spread like wildfire, a video she posted of herself in an empty theater, presumably about to watch the film. Whether she was trying to make light of the situation or genuinely enjoying a private screening, the sight of her giggling in a vacant auditorium only amplified jokes that no one was seeing Snow White. It didn't help that she declared the movie the #1 film in the world on social media, a claim that many ridiculed given the dreadful box office performance. People took screenshots, circulated memes, and pinned her comments as the epitome of an out-of-touch star refusing to accept reality. But the real gut punch came when rumors of firings started circulating. According to multiple insiders, though none confirmed by official statements, Rachel Z was quietly dropped from several upcoming projects. She was allegedly removed from a potential voice role in Toy Story 5, codenamed Spiral. There were also murmurs that she'd been in talks for a Pirates of the Caribbean reboot, but that as well fell through before it even got off the ground. Then came speculation about Blumhouse Productions, a major player in the horror landscape, supposedly cutting her from a new trilogy. On top of all that, stories floated around that Warner Brothers had nixed her from a political thriller in which she was supposed to hold a key supporting part. Now, Hollywood being what it is, deals fall apart all the time for reasons that have nothing to do with personal controversy. Budgets shift, scripts get reworked, or entire projects get shelved. But the timing of these alleged drops made it all look like Rachel Z's blossoming career had skidded to a halt. Commentators began describing her situation as a near-instant downfall. One minute, she was hailed as a rising star with a golden ticket. The next, she was the scapegoat for a high-profile fiasco, untouchable to studios that feared a similar meltdown. And what happened next would shock everyone, because the story became larger than just one actress and one underwhelming box office tally. It turned into a cultural flashpoint. Fans and critics hammered Disney for apparently forgetting what made its own properties special. People called out what they saw as forced moralizing or shallow modern touches that added nothing but friction to the final product. Others, meanwhile, ridiculed Rachel Z for doubling down on an approach that seemed to belittle the original fairy tale. The question of how far Disney should and can go in updating a classic tale for new generations hovered over every discussion. There's a lesson here, too, about just how quickly the internet can turn on any major brand or personality. In the old days, an actor who made tone-deaf comments might be shielded by PR teams and the relative slowness of traditional media. Today, a single remark on Twitter or a short video can spark an endless conversation, intensify existing resentments, and shape an entire project's reputation for good or ill. By the time Snow White actually debuted in theaters, it already felt like an underdog, weighed down by negativity that overshadowed any genuine attempt at artistry. Naturally, Disney's official statements tried to minimize the backlash. Company spokespeople insisted that initial box office returns shouldn't overshadow the heart of the film. Others claimed that, with time, the movie would find an audience, especially if released on Disney Plus or other streaming platforms. Yet the streaming market is its own battlefield these days. People have grown picky about what they'll spend their time watching, and negative word of mouth can doom a release before it even arrives in the queue. Meanwhile, Rachel Z's public image continued to take hits. She made remarks during the actor's strike that suggested she believed cast members should be compensated for every single click once a film hits streaming. Some folks online found that stance naive or unrealistic. Others, especially those who favor radical change in Hollywood's contract structures, applauded her for standing firm. But the blowback among more conventional voices was swift. They called her demands a prime example of Hollywood entitlement, fueling a narrative that she was difficult to work with. Whenever she tried to defend herself or clarify her position, her critics only dug their heels in further, accusing her of failing to show gratitude for the success she'd already achieved. Those behind-the-scenes murmurs about her complaining over the length of filming days didn't help either. She allegedly spoke about being forced to wear the heavy, elaborate Snow White costume for 16 or 18 hours straight. While that's undeniably exhausting, many in the business pointed out it's hardly rare. Actors on big sets routinely push through intense conditions, especially if the production involves complicated makeup or complex stunts. For a relative newcomer to gripe so publicly about standard filming realities rubbed some industry veterans the wrong way. They saw it as yet another sign that she might be out of touch with the typical demands of filmmaking. All of this overshadowed the actual merits of her performance. Critics who watched the film carefully noted moments where Rachel Zegler's singing shined, or where she brought an interesting spin to the classic character. But once the negativity around an actor's persona reaches a boiling point, it can be nearly impossible to separate art from controversy. Whether she deserved the blame or was merely an unfortunate face of a flawed project, the narrative had already hardened. She was the star of a fiasco, and her attitude was only making it worse. Disney, for its part, faced a broader identity crisis. In recent years, the studio has banked on big event remakes of vintage properties. Several found remarkable success, but the cracks were already forming in the formula. Audiences enjoyed The Jungle Book or Beauty and the Beast to a degree, but fatigue set in over time. Each new trailer for a live-action reimagining now triggers suspicion. Is this going to be a lazy cash grab or a loving tribute? Are the changes purposeful and smart, or are they simply chasing some box-checking idea of modern themes? With Snow White, the skepticism kicked in early. The dwarfs are iconic. Even the earliest marketing material made fans wonder if Disney was afraid to present them in the traditional way, out of fear of stereotyping or offending. Rumors circulated of heavy CGI, bizarre concept art, and behind-the-scenes confusion about how to adapt those characters respectfully. In the end, none of it gelled into a convincing storyline. The comedic tone clashed with serious attempts at female empowerment. The absence, or drastic reduction, of classic elements that gave Snow White her charm left a vacuum that wasn't filled by anything cohesive or magical. More than that, the fiasco laid bare how tough it is to modernize a beloved fairy tale without losing the essence people treasure. Snow White's innocence, for instance, was essential to the original film. Critics argued that Rachel Zegler's version came across as dismissive of that innocence, pushing a more brash or self-aware angle that felt at odds with the whimsical backdrop. If you change the main character too much, viewers might ask, why even call it Snow White anymore? In any case, the meltdown is instructive for the entire film industry. The continuing rise of streaming platforms has changed how quickly controversies spread and how deeply they affect ticket sales. If fans sense a misstep, they can decide in an instant to watch something else, whether it's a Netflix original or a random YouTube video. Disney discovered that no matter how big its brand might be, it's not immune to real-time backlash that can capsize an entire marketing plan. Fans, too, are rethinking their relationship with classic Disney. Some have begun rewatching the 1937 Snow White to remind themselves why it was so special. Others are revisiting older live-action adaptations, from comedic twists like Mirror Mirror to the darker reimagining starring Kristen Stewart, deciding that while none of those are perfect, at least they didn't try so hard to bury the fairy tale's original charm. Ultimately, people want the comfort of these tales without feeling like the studio behind them is lecturing or disregarding the audience's emotional connection. So, what does the future hold for Rachel Zegler? Hollywood can be surprisingly forgiving when an actor delivers a breakout performance in the right project. She might land another role that lets her talents shine and reintroduces her to the public in a more positive light. Or she might struggle to overcome the perception that her attitude on the Snow White press tour was combative and dismissive, a perception that can cling to an actor's reputation for years. As audience members, we've seen stars rise, fall, and rise again. Whether that second chapter happens for her may hinge on how she navigates the aftermath of this meltdown. and whether she modifies her public approach to appease fans who felt burned. As for Disney, the question is whether the company will keep forging ahead with these reboots in exactly the same way, or finally pivot toward more original content. Some insiders argue that the entire fiasco might force Disney to slow down and reevaluate, especially if future live-action adaptations face similar blowback. Others believe the machine is too big to change direction so quickly. Reboots rake in easy marketing tie-ins, and even a disappointment can eventually find some life on streaming platforms worldwide. But after a string of underwhelming or controversial results, the brand's once unshakable luster is showing signs of tarnish. What's clear is that Snow White has become the textbook case of what can happen when you take a cornerstone of cinematic history and attempt to refashion it without carefully minding what made it beloved in the first place. The fiasco highlights the precarious relationship between modern social attitudes, corporate marketing, the demands of a famously passionate fan base, and the raw power of online chatter. In the midst of it all, an actress at the heart of the story has found herself under constant fire, accused of everything from rewriting a classic to belittling the audience's intelligence. The real takeaway is that no franchise, however iconic, is safe from public skepticism when changes seem forced or disingenuous. At this point, many longtime fans are left asking, should we keep supporting these remakes if the studios behind them don't respect the source material? Others worry that Disney's attempt to remain culturally relevant keeps overshadowing the simple joy of a well-told fairy tale. The entire industry may have to adapt, or risk losing the trust of families and faithful viewers worldwide. As the dust settles, it's not entirely impossible for Snow White to enjoy a post-theatrical life. Maybe some streaming audience, less aware of the controversy, will find it and judge it purely on entertainment value. But given the intensity of the backlash so far, it's unlikely to become a cult favorite in the same way some Disney underperformers have found new appreciation. Instead, it'll likely remain a symbol of how swiftly a brand can overreach when it tries to fix something that wasn't broken. Rachel Z, for her part, still has talent that earned her praise in earlier roles, but she now stands at a crossroads. She can attempt to patch up the damage, perhaps by acknowledging mistakes or doubling down on future projects that truly showcase her abilities. Or she could dig in her heels, continuing to present herself as a misunderstood visionary. Whichever path she takes, the meltdown of Snow White will forever be linked to her name, making it either the cautionary tale that nearly ended her run or the stepping stone she overcame in a spectacular comeback. The lasting consequences for Disney may run deeper. Each time they announce a new live-action adaptation, be it of The Little Mermaid, Hercules, or something else, people may reference Snow White as the prime example of how things can go horribly wrong if the creative team isn't aligned with the essence of the original. In fact, fans will now likely scrutinize every early interview, casting choice, and leaked plot detail to see if the studio learned from these mistakes. A single slip of the tongue by a star or a rumor about major story changes can spawn immediate alarm bells across the internet, overshadowing months of production efforts. With so much money on the line and so many eyes watching, Disney's predicament is a stark reminder that success in Hollywood isn't just about big budgets and big names. It's about respecting an audience's attachment to a story, especially one as iconic as Snow White. If the final product fails to honor that nostalgia or tries to shoehorn in too many updates without genuine artistry, it might do more harm than good. And if the film's star antagonizes or even appears to antagonize the very audience that might pay for a ticket, the negativity only snowballs. In the end, Snow White stands as one of the more destructive chapters in Disney's modern age, a fiasco that highlights the tightrope walk between innovation and tradition. The meltdown serves as a wake-up call, proving that in an era where the public can organize and express opinions faster than ever before, every creative choice and every public statement can shape a film's destiny. Rachel Z's career, Bob Iger's legacy, and the future of Disney's storied catalog may all feel the aftershocks for years to come. Whether this fiasco becomes a fleeting embarrassment or a permanent shift in how Disney, and Hollywood at large, treats classic tales ultimately depends on how well the lessons are learned. When you strip away the marketing hype and the heated social media exchanges, you're left with a saga that strikes at the heart of what Disney stands for: timeless wonder, cross-generational storytelling, and an unspoken pact with the audience that certain classics deserve the utmost care. By trying to force a story older than most of us into a brand new mold, one that many felt was hasty and disconnected, the company alienated the very people who might have embraced a thoughtful update. Rachel Z, in many ways, became the face of this fiasco, whether fairly or not, and learned the hard way that in Hollywood, one misfire can drastically alter your trajectory. If there's one final thought to carry forward, it's this: stories matter, and so do the ways we tell them. Massive corporations may chase the latest trend or aim to generate quick headlines, but the true currency of beloved fairy tales is emotional resonance, something you can't fake with glossy trailers or loud social media claims. As fans, critics, and everyday viewers step back to rewatch the 1937 classic or share memories of why it mattered, it's clear that Snow White's fiasco is more than just a footnote. It's a reminder that even in the largest entertainment empire on Earth, the audience will always have the last word.